Welcome back to the show, everybody. It's your host, John Scardina. I am so excited for this episode. Several months ago at the NATO SEP, I've talked about NATO a few times on this episode or on this show. I had the opportunity to meet an amazing individual. I actually just heard more about his background just 5 minutes ago, and so I'm really excited to follow up with him and see where his career has led him and get his advice for you, the audience. This is Colonel Chris McKinney. He's the Chief of Staff for the 46th Military Police. He's also the Director and Program Manager for the Task Force 46. He's with the National Guard. He has tons of experience. We're going to be talking about that today. Colonel, welcome to the show.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me on today. Great to see you, virtually speaking again.
Yeah, it's funny when we were in September and I was watching these presentations about urban warfare and hearing the different perspectives. John Spencer gave a great presentation about the Mumbai attacks. He was on the show on the anniversary of the Mumbai attack in November. And now we're fast forwarding, several months, and here we are with Ukraine and everything else going on. Of course, for our audience, this is pre-recorded, so this might be slightly outdated by the time it comes out. But in terms of a world of shifting priorities, nation states either acting like morons or individuals acting like morons, you have a ton of perspective that you can provide the field on from our side of the house. How do you counter, or how do you make sure that we train up to be able to combat these I would say horrific situations? And so just to set the stage briefly for our audience, can you provide a background of where you can come from in talking about this subject?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an attorney as well, but I also was a special.
Of course you are.
The FBI for 8 years. I did the FBI for 8 years in the Washington field office, which I actually had to be out of the military during that time period. Before that, I had been an infantry captain, and I kind of went into a standby ready reserve during the course of the time served with the FBI. Got back in to the military uniform after 9/11. There had been a lawsuit associated with agents being able to do both military and be a special agent, since they're considered an essential employee. And then been doing the military really kind of full time ever since, with the NORTHCOM mission, United States Northern Command mission that we have for Homeland Defense now is a requirement for us. And then before that, it had been SBIRN. Of course, the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear used to be with an E at the end, SBIRN E, and that was high yield explosives. They dropped that a couple of years back, and now they've also added the all hazards requirements in there. So really the NORTHCOM mission sets is the HD, Homeland Defense, the all hazards, the SBIRN, and weapons of mass destruction. So by hook or by crook, I've had to get very good at understanding some of that. And frankly, John, I do it through working with subject matter experts like yourself and a lot of our interagency partners who have plowed a lot of the ground before in different environments. And it's led to a great mission, one that we hope we'll never have to fully execute, because should we have to do that, it's probably going to mean it's been America's worst day. And we hope that never happens.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Thank you for the compliment. When I served on the National Strike Team, I was tasked with looking at SBIRN and understanding not just civilian military operations and protecting critical assets, but how populations would deal with that, both from a messaging perspective, cultural perspective, and literally just evacuations and triage. And so to talk with another expert who has been what I would consider on the front lines of setting up a lot of these things and dealing with it firsthand, while I've been looking at, the possibility of, the America's worst day.
Right.
That's it's interesting to get in the room of the both sides of the perspective, the strategic planning from the civilian side, and then get to the military side and start to coordinate. And I think that's really important, both from the audience perspective, but also for the future of emergency management the best emergency managers are the best coordinators. I'm not going to be the Chris McKinneys of the world, the Colonel McKinneys of the world, but I can meet you. I can say, hey, what are you doing? What can you provide? What are the resources? What are the training that we need? And start just diving down capabilities and parceling that out while you're doing your mission investigations. We can do our mission in supporting, civilian populations and getting people out of the way of, bad problems.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, your experience on the strike teams there with FEMA, just immeasurable experience, and really, John, to get back to I think kind of the initial question that you asked with respect to Ukraine. A heart-wrenching scenario, obviously a democracy being attacked by somebody else. Foreign policy strategically, it is a bit of a trick bag, with the NATO nations and Ukraine not being a member of NATO. So of course there's no Article 5 invocation. But one thing that I think we have seen is that there is significant dense urban fighting in some of these, city centers. Obviously hasn't uniquely happened in Kiev yet, in the capital, but when it does, that is a significant population there where those folks are going to have to be doing dense urban operations, which when you ask about the preparation, that's something that we saw not only from a homeland perspective many, many years ago, but we knew that there were OCONUS overseas applications to it as well. So, we've been really studying that dense urban model for a long time. Learned a lot from Dr. Russ Glenn when he was at TRADOC, and Professor Bert Tussing up at the Army War College, as well as PhDs at MIT, at the Lincoln Labs. I could go on and on, but we have learned a lot from our partners on that.
Real quick, we're going to pause for this week's Disaster Tough endorsements. This show is owned and operated by professional emergency managers at Doberman Emergency Management. We apply disaster tough logic by protecting life, property, and business continuity through planning, mitigation, and training. Check us out at DobermanEMG.com or click on the show notes. Radio comms just got a major breakthrough with the L3 Harris XL Extreme 400P. It's the newest and toughest radio out there. Built by their space and tactical teams, the XL Extreme series can take a beating. 1,700-degree blast of heat, repeated 3-meter drops, rain, salt water, you name it. The XL Extreme series by L3 Harris can take it. Visit L3Harris.com to schedule your demo today. The battle to monitor and contain COVID-19 just got exponentially better for us. We are officially introducing an electronic, reusable COVID-19 test through our sponsors. It's called the COVID Plus Test, created by Tiger Tech, distributed by FS Global. This is the first FDA-authorized, rapid, non-invasive pre-screener. It's extremely easy to use. Forget those one-time use swabs. This is a disaster-tough technology. For more information on the COVID Plus test, check out our show notes. Okay, let's jump back in. Yeah, the idea is that, based off of what we're looking at Ukraine, one, kudos to them for just refusing to bow down, and talk about, 9/11 was probably the last time I saw or felt really multiple conflicting communities come together, that different political backgrounds, different whatever, and say, hey, we're on a single mission here. This was bad. And we're all united in that. Whether it was the United States, we also had lots of, foreign friends who said, hey, like we recognize this was a bad day for you. And, you look at what Putin has done, and, you're looking at what Switzerland is doing right now. You're looking at what Germany's doing right now. You're looking at, some of these other people who may be conflicting priorities and political opinions, and everyone's recognizing, because the Ukrainians, it's really uniting on the other side. And I hope they don't have to pay for that. But I am grateful that they kind of woke up the world a little bit, saying like, hey, democracy has its place.
Absolutely. You're right. And obviously, the support of this country, and, certainly our hearts are with the Ukrainian people who are bravely facing all this adversity. And much like you said, John, I mean, seeing the EU come together, just yesterday, I know this may not come out for a couple of, weeks or something, but I mean, that was absolutely the kumbaya moment, frankly,
Yeah.
that we should have a lot. And you're right. I saw that firsthand as, an FBI agent following, the attacks on the World Trade Centers. And I was at the Pentagon, and we saw that immediately following, and very unfortunate at how quickly that wanes, though. So I hope for this one, we can keep the support together, because there are other peer and near peer actors, and certainly in China with what they're looking at for the South China Seas, and obviously their historical arguments to bring Taiwan back into the fold may be on the horizon too. I certainly hope not, but those are critical things. And I mean, we held together for a while after 9/11, but certainly you saw a splintering of countries and even interagency support for one another not too much longer after it, which is very unfortunate. Over.
Yeah, I wish that we didn't require dramatic events to help people, remind people of like I won't say their place, but their place in the world, their place in their community, of like, hey, there's stupid people, and those stupid people are bad. And then there's good people, and you can have different opinions, but at the end of the day, you need to come together and figure out, like, negotiation is so much better. I will say my one hope with Taiwan is that, like, I thought, like, my personal prediction, I'm not an expert, but I was like, okay, are they going to try to follow the Crimea, like, Olympic Crimea, Olympic Taiwan? But I'm hoping that the hurt locker that everyone's putting on Russia right now is making China really reconsider, the numbers. Is it worth it to do it? And, hopefully that's good for the Taiwanese people as well. But who knows? Let's get over to some of the other subjects that can be really helpful, because I want other people to hear your perspective. You talked about training, and you talked about a training regimen, and specifically with, or especially with everything that's happening in the world right now, training is so critically important. Not only did you respond to January 6th, I believe, but you also did training exercise in the Capitol afterwards. And so to hear that perspective of the use of training, if you're going to make a pitch to, emergency managers in the field, why have comprehensive training?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and we found that out with the nuances with the COVID response. This headquarters, the 46th Military Police Command, Task Force 46, actually had theater level responsibilities for U.S. Army North and NORTHCOM on the COVID side of the thing. So it was very important that we had conducted a lot of training up to that point, because almost everything that we do consistently, and I really think the military does a phenomenal job of planning, training, executing that type of training. And it's no secret. Most of the time the plan, it gets thrown out the window right away. But if you don't plan it, you don't spend that time, right? Then when it comes time to execute, you don't know how to adjust, adapt, which is really, I think, the important takeaway of all that. And the only real ways that you can figure out how to solve those problems at time of need is to run through that regimen. Planning is painful. Training is painful. But the more realistic I think that you make the planning and the execution of the training, the more valuable it is. And frankly, John, I'll use it as an example. We were talking about the dense urban initiatives that we've done here at Task Force 46, how they could apply overseas, how they can apply in this country. We started that out years ago because, back when it used to be private, Chris McKinney, in the 80s, actually serving the Reagan military. That's how long I've been around. We were doing the mount training, right, to replicate urban centers. And you can never do that. Like, we didn't experience anything like that frictionless environment when we were in Iraq doing search and cordons, right? So there are real world friction points that come into play that the only way you can do that's to exercise it in a city. And even though I know there have been a lot of folks on the Department of the Army and other joint services side trying to build facilities, we took a different approach, and we said, let's do this in major metropolitan areas. One reason, because of the Homeland Defense threat, and two, it added such a sense of realism that we were working with those real world incident commanders on the ground, those fire chiefs, police chiefs that would either be the IC or would be part of a unified command group. And you started to understand that as we did these. And we've now, before COVID, we had reps in New York City, and we had reps in Detroit twice. Post COVID, because that's what I'm going to call our period now. Got my fingers crossed, right? We've been able to do ones back in New York City again, out on Randall's Island, and we did them in Los Angeles, and we've got one scheduled for July 22 with Philadelphia, and we're very, very excited about that. So all of that goes into the training regiment that we think is imperative to conduct the real friction-laden training, because without it, I think everybody gets an opportunity to do high fives, back slaps. But I think you get to walk away without really knowing just where you bend and where you break. When we do it, yeah, we get a good idea, right? Seeing these kids drive around in LMTVs in major New York City traffic, they get a feel, right? Streets might be closed, but they might not. They might be wide open. Same thing we did at the New York, New Jersey Port Authority. We worked with Captain Chris Zimmerman over there at the New York, New Jersey Port Authority, and we got an opportunity to see, hey, this is where we'll stage you all if we have an event in New York City. But make no mistake about it, the port is a money-making venture, so you need to do what you need to do as quickly as you can, because the port's got to reopen.
The man, you said this phrase earlier that I loved. You said training should be painful, or training is painful. And you just made the pitch of why training needs to be painful. On our side of the house, I have found that this is my critique of emergency management, and we are addressing it face on or head on this year, is I would go to these trainings or these certifications, and they would say, hey, this is a 9 to 5 training for 5 days a week, but it'd be approaching 3 p.m. and everyone's like, okay, we're going to try to end early, and everybody would be rushing to get out of there. And then the last day they would do a test, post an open book test, and everybody would get all 100% of the answers right. You need to walk out of there like, I could have done this for 30 minutes on an online, click. And it's like, what do we need to do? And so I started integrating with urban search and rescue operations, or at least the training operations. I was invited to be a speaker there, and was so blown away, not by just the competency of the instructors, but the participants wanted to stay late every day. They were asking questions. They were pushing them. And then the last day, it was supposed to be a full-scale exercise. It was supposed to go to 10 p.m. It was 11:30. They were still going. They were still asking questions. They wanted to push harder. And I was like, that is the difference. The difference of the level of instruction. Emergency managers are passionate. They're people with degrees. They're getting better at their jobs, but we need to get to that level. And so the same thing with you. We're now saying, okay, let's put on our own training. We're going to take the USAR model of skill stations in the morning, scenarios in the afternoon, hot washes, and then a full scale. And we're going to do 12-hour ops at this end of this thing, operational period. And we're going to, basically, we're calling it as Adventure as you go. We're going to do checks along the way. Hey, are you coming up real time? Are you coming up with the right answers? Yes, no. If no, your problems have got to get worse. Problems about to get worse. Right. And so we want to stress them out, because if they're stressed in that environment, they will be less likely to be stressed, or at least they can handle that stress in the real world scenario. So it's really fascinating to think about how, as you noted, plans basically never get followed. But if your planning process is strong, then you'll most likely be successful, right?
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything you said. And, prime example of that, even using the urban search and rescue model, our USAR team for this mission year really is out of California, and they got an opportunity to do that side-by-side station training with FDNY and Riverside and LA Fire Department too at different venues. But the opportunity to work side-by-side was so phenomenal for our guys, because there is one, adventure learning, kind of like you mentioned, right? But two, you're learning from folks that get an opportunity to do it every day with those professional fire departments. And that you just learn a ton about ways to modify techniques to be more efficient and effective. And those guys did, right? They were trying to stay way late into the evening beyond the time that we did it. And I said, hey guys, FDNY is going to charge me overtime for this. I was kidding with them, right? But the FDNY guys were great. They wanted to stay with it and do it. But I mean, what we learned was great. And again, it's that training that you actually do. Not that there's anything wrong with classroom instruction and everything, but there can be no substitute for hands-on, really sitting back, scratching your head, going, yeah, I don't really know how I'm going to do this one, but I got to figure it out. So let's roll up the sleeves and look at this problem set. So it's an effective way, really.
Yeah, it reminds me of, so we kind of implemented that on the on that FEMA team that I served with, and 2017, it was May or June, we did this internal training exercise where we had mass flooding go off in Philadelphia. And what we wanted the unusual circumstance that we wanted to address was a zoo being impacted by this flood. And, we're used to people. We're used to saying, hey, get people out, buses, whatever. How do you deal with, an animal population, especially in a zoo in a city? And so that's what we addressed. And in that, we started looking at all the chemicals in the water that could affect the animals. Something that we usually know the floodwater is really bad, obviously. Right. But specifically looking at the chemicals. Well, you fast forward to Hurricane Harvey, and it was I can't give you all the details for the people and for the audience, but there was a very similar situation with a human population and a chemical that we were looking at that became very dangerous. And it's fascinating to look at that because of the training that we did, and because we were starting to dive in deeper into some of these stuff, we knew what to look for. We addressed it. The entire Harvey response was shifted for like 18 hours to get this population out of the way. This facility was impacted. Nobody was hurt. And then you fast forward 2 or 3 years, and I'm talking about this at the urban search and rescue training, and one of the instructors in the back goes, hey, that was you? You were the one who redirected us? I'm like, yeah. So it's just like, it's funny like how like the field is all interconnected, and yet I didn't know that guy, 3 years or 4 years ago, but now we're here. So it shows that on my side, man, I wish I was coordinating with USAR a little bit more closely. I wish I was doing this, which is another reason why training and a unified command in that training is so critically important.
No, it is. And those were great scenarios that you had there in Philadelphia. I mean, lions and bears and tigers. Oh my, I haven't quite seen that one before, but
Yeah.
Hey, it can happen, right? I did see in Katrina exactly what you're talking about with the corrosive chemicals that got into the water, even as we were doing health and welfare checks on into the month of September 2005, right? The sheen on the water from all the chemicals in people's garages and things were really very pervasive. And, you were getting burns on your skin and couldn't figure it out why, but it was just the chemicals coming off the water with the sun. And so those are all things that you got to consider, right? Because those are one-offs that we don't always train to. And I know sometimes people think the training scenarios get, a little out of whack, a little too crazy, too many, scenarios going on at the same time. But, the truth of the matter is you've got to plan for the absolute worst, because systems will fail. And again, as first responders, whether military or firefighting, EMS, police, you can't just throw your hands up in the air, right? You've got to work those problem sets. So, and interesting, John, I think you're tracking this, right? But we do have an event next week. It's going to be March 8th through 11 in Buffalo, and it's the cyber effects on a consequence management exercise. For us, it's DISCA.
Talk about the time of that, man.
Department of Defense, support the civil authorities, but it's going to be great, right? Lots of great academic presentations, and then we get to roll up our sleeves with some tabletop cyber effects that follow, essentially, some type of subburn event. And you can't throw your hands up. So we got to roll up our sleeves and figure that out as a collective group with a lot of phone a friend options. The Canadians are participating too on the Toronto RCMP side. And that's the reason why we did the cyber effects exercise is in training. we kept throwing in little cyber injects to things, and frankly, it would shut the training down because nobody could figure out how to get past whatever it was, whether it was malware, ransomware, something that affected the water, the electric. And now we're actually working to try to figure it out. And yeah, I was kind of bummed. Actually, a lot of the very scenarios that we had, I think unfortunately the Russians are using them against the Ukrainians now. So
Yeah.
my team will think I stole those, but those have been in development for like over a year and a half. But we look forward to it next week. So
The speaking of Ukraine, so I've been I think I shared this on LinkedIn on just a personal thing. I've been starting to help out because of NATO SEP and talking to some NATO partners. I've been helping Denmark, Finland, a couple other places out. But I also had the opportunity to meet other people who work directly with NATO, and just in my own research of trying to figure out who does what. And I had one of those people on here, Kyle King, who does crisis management with NATO, and he and I were talking, and I got connected with some other people. It's been a little crazy the last 4 or 5 days, but basically talking about cyber. One of the big problems right now is just trying to figure out how many people, looking at one specific problem set, right? People in hospitals. How many people are in hospitals? How do you get that data? How are they tracking that from the NATO side out of Ukraine? And as I was talking to people, one of their biggest problems is actually getting the data because they're being hit so many times by Russia that they're not even able to get reliable data. And so it's just showing that they are attacking everybody on multiple fronts to hamper how much knowledge or how much pain they're inflicting on Ukraine right now. But they also don't want the world to know how much Ukraine is pushing back. So it is, cyber is, I have this theory, by the way, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So it's like David and Goliath. So I have this idea that, if in, I don't know, Old Testament times, whatever, 5,000 years ago, the idea of that if your strongest warrior can take out our strongest warrior, then there's no war, because if my strongest guy can take out your army, then, it all works out. Does the same thing start to happen with cyber and technology, where we're going to get to the point where my technology is so advanced that, I could take out your tech, so you might as well not even fight the war? That's essentially what's happening right now. It's what happens with nukes, right?
right.
So it feels like I don't know.
No, I mean, you bring up a great point, John. I mean, I think we're clearly in uncharted territory. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to get into anything about offensive or defensive cyber because of the classification, but from the perspective of the will of the people that are involved, I think that's critical, right? So, could the will of the American people survive 72 hours of financial attacks when you can't access your money, or you've lost power and you can no longer utilize a cell phone, or cell towers are taken out? So I think the winner of that event really is the one that presents with the most resiliency, right? Because the ground effects won't change, right? There are alternatives for power generation that we can certainly do, as long as we've got the capabilities to access gasoline, MoGas, diesel, whatever those generators are running on. It's going to be prioritized, right? The hospitals are going to get priority for that. But I think it really goes back to the will of the people. And in America, I'm very hopeful that we would be able to have the will that we're capable of having as Americans, and outlast the effects of any type of cyber event that went on. But, time will certainly tell how that would manifest itself. But we certainly try to get creative. And that's really one of the reasons why we're doing that cyber event, right? So we can talk about that. How can we overcome this stuff, regardless of what near peer or foreign state actor does it, or even if it's domestic, right? How do we overcome it? Because at the end of the day, we still have a job to do for the American public, and we're dead set on making that happen. So I look forward to doing that next week, right?
Yeah.
And the comms thing, right, John, if I could, right? So we do communication exercises everywhere we go. If I can harken back to that, 9/11, 2001, I'm sitting there side by side with an Arlington County fire department guy. I walk away. I've got my Harris 152 Motorola. It was a brick. Essentially, they're on the same channel. And, even in the clear, I walked away from him probably 20, 30 feet, tried to give him a call. System still didn't talk to each other, right? Even in the clear at the time. So that's stuck in my crawl over the years. And so I can tell you for the last 10 years, we've done communications exercises up, down, and laterally to make sure that we can do it. Lots of changes, but trying to figure out what peripherals work. Because if we're not really able to effectively communicate, then we're just camping out when we exercise, right? We're not really, might as well have 10 cans and some string. And we find a lot of friction points, especially in the high rise, which a lot more cities are going to, even higher than, they had been in the past. A lot of subterranean environments where you don't have repeaters. People might go. We're certainly seeing that in Ukraine. A lot of people go into the subway system for it. So we try to exercise that communication piece too, which is hard because systems still don't communicate the way that they should.
So we could have an entire episode of literally what you just talked about right there. My thing is like, so you just talked about resiliency. Now, sometimes I make fun of resilience because so I'm like, be disaster tough. But if you're talking about resiliency of being able to bounce back, that's exactly the place of resiliency. You're talking about no matter who, no matter where, no matter when, what is your capability and your time to man up moment to be able to overcome. Now, for all the disasters I've been at, most of them have been natural. I've been at some very unfortunate active assailant events as well. Every time I'm in that situation, there's a group of people who desperately need help. And there's a large group of people who I've been shocked by their level of resiliency, their ability to kind of dust the crap off and get back to work, or try to figure out something. Once they do that, it's empowering to watch, kind of like what's happening in Ukraine right now. It's like dusting off and get to work. But it's another thing. But we are talking about communication. Oh my gosh, if we can get to the point where if I'm reading after actions and I don't see communication, and it's like not like, oh, did they forget to add this in here? But like, wow, like communication was actually good. I'll be blown away. So if you can figure out communication, I think it should be constantly addressed. It's funny enough, it's on every single AAR, so it should be addressed at like every single training, so we can get away from that eventually. But it's a good point. It's a sticking point for all of us. What do you mean by communication? You just talked about technology. I talk about common language. I've been in rooms where I've been talking to ops, and I've been talking to like their GIS staff. They're saying the exact same words, and they are on different planets. Right. And so like even getting on that part, again, going back to the training piece of common language, common communication systems, practicing those communications, making sure the communications are up to date, which is a funding issue technically. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that, hence why we should have you back on to do an episode possibly on that. But today we talked about Ukraine. Thank you, sir. We talked about training. We talked about resiliency. We talked about cyber. We talked a lot of communication. We talked about all these different things. And really what it comes down to is, as you noted in the beginning, this unified command, bringing people together, putting the pain on people in that training environment so that they can be resilient when things happen in the world. And I just want to thank you so much again for coming on the show and taking the time to share your insights. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of comments from our audience. We'll bring you back on and share those comments with you.
John, thank you for having me on. My pleasure. Appreciate the opportunity. Great show. Big fan. So I look forward to future podcasts that you have on Disaster Tough with so many of the awesome people that you're able to get on there. I'm not one of them, but it's been my pleasure.
There's no humility needed in that, because you obviously know your stuff, and you've been not just a patriot in the truest sense of actually helping out the United States, but you've also been integral part in just like the last 30 minutes alone. So again, thank you so much for coming on. For all those who are listening to this episode, you probably learned a lot. I obviously had fun asking questions, and I'm sure you're going to have more questions. If you want to ask a question to Colonel McKinney, the best way to do that is to leave a comment for him and on one of our Disaster Tough channels for social media, or you can send, if you have a very specific question for the Colonel, you can send us an email at info@dobermanemg.com, and we'll pass it on to him. If you like this episode, which you should have, for this is a shameless plug moment, you got to give us a 5-star rating and subscribe. Make sure you listen to this episode, listen to future episodes, and we'll see you next week.